Hey there, I'm Mr. K. Thanks for coming back. And this is going to be the third video for our AP Lang um, uh, discussion about rhetorical situation. Um, and so in the first two videos, we did a couple things. We talked about what rhetoric is, what the rhetorical situation is, and then last video, in the last video, was delving into audience and seeing how a particular audience uh, changes how a writer or speaker might communicate. And so I hope those videos were helpful for you. For this third lesson, the nice thing is we are not introducing any new concepts yet. Before we move on, we are, in this video, we're going to look at a couple examples, textual examples, and putting the first two videos content kind of into practice. So this lesson is all about analyzing rhetoric and its effectiveness on the audience. The goal for today is there's really only one goal, and that is applying the rhetorical situation. Get that glare out of the way. In a rhetorical analysis essay. You're not writing an essay yet. We're not there. We're just trying to start piecing together how we would go about marking up a text for these specific ideas in preparation for an essay. All right, so that's the goal for today. So let's just quickly review the parts of the rhetorical situation. There are 6. And hopefully by now you've kind of been working with those terms, maybe made a Quizlet or something, old school index cards, something to get those terms across. But we have our exigence, which is the specific occasion or event that prompted the message to be spoken or written in the first place. Then we have our purpose, which is why the speaker is conveying a message. Then we have our audience, which we've looked more closely at, who the writer is speaking to. Then our context, the circumstances surrounding the situation. Then we have the writer, who is doing the writing. And then we have our message, what the writer wants the audience to think or know. All right, that is the situation. So here is, this is the wording straight from the AP Lang exam. This is what the wording for a rhetorical analysis will look like. Now, what you see on your screen, you're like, there's a lot of brackets and italics and stuff. That's because this is called concrete wording. What that means is this is just showing you the format, the structure that the prompt will always be in. All right. So, things in brackets would be kind of filled in depending on what the text is. All right. So first, the first bracket here, they're going to give you some background on the rhetorical situation. What's nice is, and we'll see examples today, but what's nice is that they will, tell you who is speaking, typically when it was, what was happening, what was the event that this speech was given at, things like that. They'll give you pieces of the rhetorical situation. All right. After they do that, then the sentence will start this way: read the passage carefully. Right? It'll always say that. Then it'll say, write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices. Then, depending on who the writer is, the writer, the last name, right, makes in order to, or makes the choices the writer makes to, then it'll be one of these 3 words, these verbs: develop, achieve, or convey. It'll be one of those depending on what the author was doing. His or her, either argument, purpose, or message. All right. So And you'll see an example of this in a minute, but just to give you an idea so there's no surprises on the exam, this is what the wording will always look like, or the prompt will always look like. All right. So here is an example. Sorry, it's a bit blurry here, but here is an example from a past AP Lang exam. All right, notice we are starting with question 2. Yes, we're going out of order because I agree wholeheartedly with College Board in this, that they start with the rhetorical analysis, teaching rhetorical analysis, and I do as well in my classes. I always, it's the one that I think students need the most time to get, and so we start the year right off the bat. We jump in with rhetorical analysis. So yes, it's question 2. Right, it'll say the suggested time, 40 minutes for the essay. This question counts for 1/3 of the total essay section score. Right, so that's just exam kind of language, but that'll always be there. Now, on the last slide, you saw this wording, the prompt wording. Now, here's a real example. Right, here's that prompt wording kind of filled in. All right, so here we go. Here's the text that we're going to look at today. Here's some background on it. Right. After her escape from slavery, Sojourner Truth became a vocal supporter of the abolitionist movement and the feminist movement. In 1851, Truth attended the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio, where a group of men monopolized the audience with biblical evidence for keeping women subservient. Truth, who had not planned to speak, felt compelled to respond. She stood and gave the following speech. Okay, pause for just a second. Up until that point, that is all rhetorical situation. All right. So on the last slide where it said background on the rhetorical situation, right? It's not just one sentence. There's several, right? So that's all background. Then it jumps in with the prompt wording here where it says, read the passage carefully. Write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices Sojourner Truth makes to convey her message that women should have more rights. Okay? It will always tell you some background, some rhetorical situation kind of background, and it will tell you, or will ask you to write about how this author is conveying this specific message, or developing his or her argument that blah 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 blah. Right? They fill that in for you. So, just real quickly, I know this goes without saying, but I have read many essays over the years that were beautiful, but they didn't answer the prompt. Right? That's an issue. Your essay has to be about how Sojourner Truth uses language, right, in order to convey her message that women should have more rights. Right? So, that's your job, right? So it'll give you the prompt just like that. Okay. I almost asked if anyone had any questions because I'm used to teaching in class. If you have questions, obviously you can always email me. Okay. So here is the rhetorical situation on the left, just to remind you once again. All right. Here is the prompt up at the top, and then the speech down at the bottom. Look how short it is, but it's so powerful and so historically significant. It's amazing how she can use so few words and yet leave such a huge kind of footprint. It's really interesting. So here's what I would ask you to do, as I typically do in these videos. Go ahead here in a second when I say go. Hit pause. And what I want you to do is try and identify each of these 6, right? Exigence, purpose, audience, context, writer, message, over here in not only the text itself, but the prompt as well. Where do you see that? Where do you see those things come out? Where do you see exigence? Where do you see purpose? And, if you're doing it on paper, I guess you could underline it, whatever works for you, right? So go ahead and hit pause, and then I will kind of show you some of those ideas. All right, ready, set, go. Okay, so let's look for a rhetorical situation in this text. All right, here are the 6. Now, a couple quick things before I go through them. First, there's going to be some overlap. Some things could be considered, I'm making this up, but, it's purpose and it's also context, or, something like that. So you might have some overlap. And the other thing is, this is not all of them by any means. All right, this whole paragraph here, I didn't identify anything, not because it's not there. I was just giving you a couple examples. All right, I really should have read this text before I asked you to identify some things. So let me read the text, and I guess as we go through, see where these things come out. All right. So and then we'll talk about each of the pieces. Okay. After her escape from slavery, Sojourner Truth became a vocal supporter of the abolitionist movement and the feminist movement. In 1851, Sojourner Truth attended the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio, where a group of men monopolized the audience with biblical evidence for keeping women subservient. Truth, who had not planned to speak, felt compelled to respond. She stood and gave the following speech. Read the passage carefully. Write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices Sojourner Truth makes to convey her message that women should have more rights. Okay, here's her actual speech. She says, "Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt, or between, the Negroes of the South and the women at the North, all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I've plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could heed me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's this they call it?" A member of the audience whispers, "Intellect." "That's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint, and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full?" Then that little man in black there, he says, "Women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman." Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down, all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they's asking to do it. The men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me. And now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. Okay, forgive the kind of poor reading, but great speech. Historically significant and such a brilliant use of language. And again, we see from the prompt up here, she hadn't planned to speak. This was not written out. She felt compelled to respond, and so came up with this off the top of her head, which is great. All right, a couple things. Let's go through. Let's start with exigence. Okay, in orange, I tried to match the colors as best I could. Okay, exigence. The specific occasion or event that prompted the message to be spoken or written. Okay, well, we see from the prompt that this group of men monopolized the audience. They were taken up all the time. And Sojourner, Miss Truth, felt compelled to respond. That's the exigence, the event, the thing or things that were happening that caused her to speak in the first place. And in the actual speech itself, right off the bat, she says, where there's so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. Basically, identifying so many people from so many different sides are yelling at each other about this. There's got to be something wrong. If everything were right, we would all agree, right? That's the exigence. Her need to speak comes out of something is, there's an injustice. There is a lack of balance in the scales, right? That's what prompts her, compels her to speak. All right. Okay. The purpose. I just had one line here at the end when she says, "And now they's asking to do it. The men better let them." They, who is they? Well, all these women together, all those women in the room, right? And I think women at large fighting for equal rights. Now they's asking to do it. The men better let them. I don't know why I have such a problem with that line. The purpose is the call for equal rights for women. The men better give women equal rights. That's the purpose, right? Comes down to a single line. Okay, the audience we have in the prompt, it's a group of men. Then it gets a little more specific in the speech itself. She says the white men. All right, she is speaking to those men in that room who, were like it says in the prompt, using scripture as as evidence, as kind of ammunition against women's rights. Right. So her audience was those men specifically. All right. And again, I think it's safe to argue, anyone that would agree with them, anyone who would agree with them. But, this speech was given in a room, and those people, those specific men in that room were the audience. Okay, the context in green, the circumstances, again, remember the context usually has a couple parts. First, it's the time, right? So it does give us a year. So it was in 1851. And the other part of the context would be at a women's rights convention in Akron, Ohio. Right? Time, place, event, all that. Okay, the writer. Now, you don't just stop at who the writer is, right? Sojourner Truth, even though that's true. And I did writer in red. It's kind of a dark orange. This is the best I could do. So it's also things about the writer that that are revealed to us. Okay, so a lot of it is in the prompt. She escaped from slavery. That's going to affect how she speaks about these things, right? She was a vocal supporter of the abolitionist movement and the feminist movement. That's important. And then at the end here, old sojourner. She refers to herself, right? And as old, and we'll talk about that a little bit in just a minute. But there's something to referring to herself as old sojourner. Ain't got nothing more to say, and sits down. All right. And then finally, the message in this paragraph here. Wouldn't you be mean to not let me have my little half measure full? All right. The message being like, don't you think it's unfair that we don't, our glasses, using that metaphor, our glasses don't hold the same amount? Mine holds a quart, or no, sorry, mine holds a pint and yours holds a quart. Isn't that a problem? Right. That's her message. And then again, at the end here, lines 31, 32, 33. All right. These women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. Right. The message, don't you think this is unfair? And then later, we need to make it fair. Right. That's the message. Again, if you found some other things, I obviously can't check your answers. But yeah, there were other lines. And if you had a specific question, you could email or ask a peer. But also some of these may overlap into kind of two things. But okay, so that is rhetorical situation, right? That is what would be expected of you on the exam. Give you a text like that, and figure out the rhetorical situation. That is step one is understanding what the prompt is asking. Step two is figuring out the rhetorical situation. Okay, we're going to use that same text, which is nice because it's fresh in our minds. All right, but connecting to audience. All right, how do we connect to audience? How does a writer or speaker connect to his or her audience? Uses those appeals. So appeals are those strategic choices made based on the rhetorical situation in order to persuade the audience. Specifically, remember, we have ethos, which is our appeals to shared values. We have our pathos, which is appeals to emotion, right? The heart. Excuse me. And then logos appeals to logic or reason. All right. So those are over on the left, just to kind of give you a reminder. And again, we're going to use the same text here. So go ahead and hit pause and try and identify, excuse me, any examples you see in the text of ethos, pathos, and logos. Where do you see those things actually coming out, right? And they're all there, just so you know, right? All three are in there at least once. So go ahead and hit pause, and then we'll talk about it. All right, ready, set, go. Okay. So here are a few examples. This dark purple is ethos, so we'll start there. Yellow is pathos, and then this sort of burgundy, sort of salmon pink something, right? That's logos. Same thing as before. This isn't necessarily all of them, and there may be, in a part where we have logos, there may have been some ethos there too, right? That's okay. But here are some examples so you can see it in text. Ethos we have when, second word of the speech, she says children. All right, what does that say about her as the speaker? She is saying, she's pointing out she is older, she is wiser, she has lived through some stuff, right? And she is referring to these people in the room. And again, specifically those white men who were speaking against equal rights. She calls them children. Putting them in their place and she in hers, right? I am an elder. I've been around a lot longer than you, right? Then she talks about at the end here, when she talks about she had 13 children. They all, most of them were sold into slavery. She cried out with a mother's grief. Gosh, that part of the speech just kills me. She says, none but Jesus heard me. Why is that ethos? Well, that says something about her belief in Jesus, right? And that is something that her listeners, we can assume most of them at that time, would have had a mutual belief in Jesus. She and those white men who were using scripture to tell her, to prove to everyone how women should not have equal rights, they were misusing, scripture, and they were out of place in what they were saying. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't believe in Jesus. They were just interpreting things much differently. So that's a shared belief between Sojourner and the audience. Later, she says, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Again, putting herself as the speaker, she's saying, I'm a woman. Where did the Christ, you keep quoting Christ and you keep talking about Jesus Christ. Where did he come from? from God and a woman. Right? She says that here later. If the first woman God ever made, Eve, right? If she was strong enough to turn the world upside down, don't you think that a room full of us in here are strong enough to turn it right back, right side up, right? And so her power as a woman, and then she ends very humbly, right? Obliged to you for hearing me. Thank you for listening, in other words. And then she says, old sojourner. Ain't got nothing more to say. So saying, I am a woman. I have power. There's strength in me, right? But then she ends on a very humble note, a note of humility, right? Where she says, old sojourner. Ain't got nothing more to say. And she sat down, right? Sort of like a mic drop moment at the end of the speech, right? So that's all ethos, talking about her place as the speaker. Pathos, we see emotion here when she is talking about the children. I've borne 13 children and seen most all sold off to slavery when I cried out with my mother's grief. All right? The heartbreak of a mother having to say goodbye to most of her children. I'm a dad with one daughter, and it would absolutely destroy me. I can't imagine. I cannot imagine, right? It's an emotional appeal. She wants her listeners to hear that and feel sadness. She wants that heartbreak, right? She wants that heartache. Why? Because it might lead to action. And then later she says, if my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full, right? Trying to evoke pity, trying to evoke in the audience an understanding that this is unfair, that it is an imbalance, right? That something is wrong or off kilter, like she says. That's pathos, the emotional appeal, the emotional pull to the heart. And then logos, the logic. When she says, nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place, and ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I've plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could heed me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? Okay, how is that logos? Remember when we talked about ethos, pathos, logos in lecture 2. It's the structure of the argument. She's saying, this is true. Here's what's true. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And yet, at the same time, ain't I a woman? Right? She's saying that, some guy in the audience is saying that women need help. Women, they're poor, fragile little creatures. They need help. They need help into carriages. They need to be lifted over ditches. And she's pointing out the hypocrisy and saying, no one ever helps me. Aren't I a woman? That's logos. That's a structural part of the argument. This is true. You're saying this is true, and yet here's evidence that it's not true. That's logos. All right. And when she keeps repeating, ain't I a woman? Right. That is a structural tactic. And then here at the end, when she says, okay, so she's talking about the first woman God ever made, Eve. She says, if Eve was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. She's saying, if you believe that Eve, it was her original sin that turned the world upside down, doesn't it reason that all of these women in here, all of us together, can't turn it right side up again? If you're really saying that one woman, right, brought sin into the world, don't you think that all of us together can take it out again? Right? It's logos. That's a structural argument. You're saying this is true. Don't you think that because that's true, that this is true? It's a we'll talk about line of reasoning later, but it's the string of the argument. This is true. This is true. This is true. Don't you think this is true? Right? It's leading to a kind of a conclusion. All right. So that's ethos, pathos, logos. And so putting it all together in the essay, which again, we're not doing yet, right? You will not merely list the examples you find. You have to analyze the choices a writer makes for a specific purpose, for a specific audience. So not just saying like, here's repetition, right? No, it's, the author repeats this phrase in order to do this, right? So it's, going that extra mile and talking about or actually analyzing, right? And it's delving deeper and analyzing the effectiveness of those choices based on what the speaker knows about the audience. Imagine Sojourner standing up in this room and talking to these people. She is the speaker of this text, this thing that she's spoken into existence. Sojourner's Truth's speech did not exist until she spoke it, right? So her audience, the text, how are those things working together, right? And how effective was it? Why, right? So it's all about delving deeper into what is going on with this language, not just what's going on, but how is it really having an effect on the audience? So today's goal was to apply the rhetorical situation in a rhetorical analysis essay. I hope that you feel that we've done so. If you have any questions, as usual, you can email me. My email is on the YouTube channel, and I appreciate you watching. I hope it was helpful. All right, see you, my friends.